Hello and welcome to Cinema Eclectica, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We're the Geek Show's dedicated movie podcast. I'm Graham, and this week I've been joined by...
Tim!
Yes. We also
and only Tim.
Technically have Mick, by the miracle of pre-recording, but, well, we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
For now, our film of the week is a new Netflix release, and if you're thinking, I've heard no publicity for this, that's because it's a new Netflix release. But those willing to go on an archaeological dig into the very bowels of the website will occasionally find one of the new films they're releasing. And this time it's Wasp Network, the new film by Olivier Assayas.
Yeah, which I managed to eventually dig down to. Which I find to be an inherently funny title, by the way. I might be the only person.
Who would make a network of wasps? What kind of a nutty nut does that?
Yes. I always missay it as Wasp Factory, in fact, in reference to Ian Banks, but...
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there isn't much wasp-related media, isn't it? They've not got the cultural profile of bees.
Yeah, all right, yeah, fair enough. This is a drama thriller about Cuban exiles in Miami.
Yes. It stars Edgar Ramirez as Rene Gonzalez, and as the film starts, he leaves his wife, played by Penelope Cruz, and starts flying over the sea on what is traditionally a pretty standard flight he makes to take parachute jumpers out. But this time he just keeps going, and he ends up in Miami, where he meets up with a community of Cuban exiles who were planning to disrupt the activities of the Cuban government and offer help to other people emigrating. Except it doesn't end at that, and as their activities progress, Rene becomes disillusioned with his cause. He also joins in with a group of other Cuban expats with very different agendas, played by a cast including Wagner Moura, Gael Garcia Bernal, and Ana de Armas. That's a pretty detailed summary for me, and I think that's largely because I was really gripped by this.
Oh, really? The only detail missing there will be the date this is set, which is 1989 or 1990?
It's the very early 90s, yeah. There's this constant sense that among the anti-Castro factions that this might be a bit of an opportunity for them, because the Soviet Union, which is Cuba's main overseas ally, has just collapsed.
Yeah, and it's also something where, when reading the synopsis of this before watching it, I sort of thought, 1990s, is that a typo for the 1960s? Because traditionally, the 60s would be a much sexier time to make a movie about Cuba about.
Yes. It's not rich in period detail, though, is it? I mean, there's one offhand reference to the movie The Bodyguard, and that's about it.
There's one computer monitor that extends very far back.
Yeah, thankfully.
That's about it.
There are no scenes where, like, people are listening to Colour Me Bad or something like that.
Yeah.
But yes.
You were really gripped by it, you say?
I found it incredibly compelling. I think for the same reason that I found the Assayas film that this is most comparable to gripping. I was thinking a lot of his film Carlos, about Carlos the Jackal, which is essentially a sort of terrorist procedural. It sounds like a really strange genre, but it might be actually, less problematic than doing the more traditional police procedural at the moment. It's just about the formation of terror networks and their operation, rather than necessarily foregrounding any kind of emotional story. And I think he does this kind of thing really well and compellingly.
Well, we're going to have to somehow cope with a slight difference of opinion there, because to tell you the truth, I was rather less than impressed by this. I was sort of... it has a peculiar quality where it's kind of... I'm just going to reveal my own ignorance here, of saying, well, it's not a period I know particularly much about, really. This kind of, especially this time and place, the sort of immediate aftermath of the, the Berlin Wall coming down, and the Cubans in the United States.
Yeah. I had absolutely no knowledge of this story before I sat down to watch the film, so you're not alone there.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's something that's quite missing from our kind of like our sort of, I don't know, education and media and things here in the UK. It's not something we see fictional accounts of very often either. So I
I
ended
can't
up
think of
coming
any
out of this
others.
thinking, although it had its moments, I felt like I would have benefited more from watching a documentary. Really,
Yeah.
it's it has a quality, and it's one of those things where I don't know how you describe it, except to say I've got kind of like a couple of I've allergies to one or two things within film, and this kept on triggering my allergies in things like providing excessive kind of like numbers of location captions and that kind of thing. It kept telling you where everybody was
Yeah.
in a funny sort of way where you get, big, huge captions put up on the screen in ways that didn't really actually help tell the story all that much. So,
I don't know. I think I needed those captions because visually, what is the difference between, say, Havana in the early 90s and a Cuban expat community in Miami in the early 90s? I mean, I suppose you could spot different makes of car and things like that, but it's asking a lot of the viewer to pick up on that rather than just putting up a caption saying Havana or
yeah,
Miami.
yeah, I suppose so. I just thought they did it kind of, in some cases, slightly excessively. He flies to some tin pot airfield in Honduras or something, and I felt like I almost didn't need to kind of know that was Honduras. The scene would sort of worked anyway with what happens.
Yeah.
And overall, I felt this problem was reflected throughout the movie in that it was a strangely kind of clumsy script. They were not really that confident in how to drop information on the viewer. And it's perhaps a product of the fact that they know that, I guess to a UK, to an American audience, maybe most people aren't actually that familiar with this kind of story. And so they're worried that you're not going to follow what's going on. But nevertheless, I felt like most of the techniques they used to actually try and make me understand still didn't leave me keeping track of it all that well.
Right. I think part of the pleasure of Asias's work for me is that even on the ones where I do just sort of sink into the detail and get a bit lost, it's a nice place to get lost. I mean, the Carlos the Jackal film I mentioned is 5.5 hours long. You're going to find some bits which leave you a bit out at sea, but I think it's a pretty solidly great 5.5 hours.
Wasp Network had some pretty good kind of aspects of its setting. Like I say, it had Havana, it had Miami, but it also had the kind of general sort of seascape and coastline with extremely sort of vivid, blue seas and skies, which
Yeah,
was and the
yeah.
kind of tourist industry as well was actually quite an important plot point. So they spent a lot of time out in this very, very, I don't know, is idyllic the right word? Almost kind of paradise-like area, except of
Yeah.
course actually there was lethal kind of threats present all the time. So they were flying these light aircraft in what looked very much like a kind of holiday, parachuting run, only they had the potential of getting shot
Yes.
down and killed by US fighter planes.
And I think when it does that, it has like a couple of scenes of explosive action, and it's not what the film is about, but when they come, I thought it did them pretty damn well.
Oh, well, again, I mean, I thought they did some of them pretty well in a way. I don't know if they managed to put them in quite the right context for me. I mean, it partly showed off, I don't know, maybe the limitations of their budget. They had the kind of explosion where I thought it looked slightly sort of CGI'd in, but I don't know, it's a very petty thing
I,
to complain about that. Yeah.
yeah, I thought a bit of that, but I'm always willing to be a bit more generous to Netflix productions on that front because I can never remember whether I've got that ghastly motion smoothing thing on the telly I'm watching it on.
Oh, right, yeah. So
It's
there's
this specially designed technology to make every single special effect look crap.
yeah. The only thing about Wasp Network is that while it still felt like it took a long time for me to get going because it had multiple characters who live kind of like slightly kind of disconnected lives. They're coming and going backwards and forwards between the US and Cuba in various different circumstances, kind of defecting. And
Yeah.
they also have quite complicated kind of relationships to the different factions. You know, like who is an agent and who is a double agent is quite obviously kind of a hook from the first. You could
Yeah.
say, well, it's suggested somebody could be a spy causing trouble for one side or the other. And in a funny sort of way, I felt like the movie and the script did a kind of surprisingly bad job of making it clear what was going on in that way. I don't know if it was partly just because they were keeping so close to like real facts and a real story. But at the same time, while that was the case, the first half of it was absolutely, well, I mean, the whole thing really, but mainly the first half of the movie was full up with these scenes where the characters meet each other in like cafes and bars and explain
Yeah.
some aspect of the situation to each other. And it kind of surprised me, it kind of amazed me how much of that they actually did and how kind of unhelpful it was to actually follow what was going on. But
When, in terms of being quite didactic, the thing that I kind of loved, and I'm not entirely sure whether I should have loved, is about an hour in, there's suddenly this English language voice over explaining the formation of the Wasp network. And it feels like the opening credits for some kind of communist version of the A-Team.
again, it's were we just watching this in different parallel universes? I know the bit you mean. I was very unimpressed and annoyed by that bit. I mean, in some ways, it set up things kind of correctly, but it came in the movie, I thought, far, far too late. And also that they'd started at the beginning with a load of, captions on screen, putting the thing in context. And I
Yeah.
felt like it was just a very, very clumsy bit of kind of info dumping at the start and then again halfway through. And also that we kind of know
Yeah.
that the Wasp network is going to come into existence, but we get almost no information about it. And I felt like it didn't even really become much of a coherent thing in the second half. I
Oh,
don't
no.
know.
I can't agree with that. I think it starts at exactly the right point. You're following the storyline that has the biggest emotional hook, which is Renee's. He leaves his wife and kids behind to go and do something he believes in, and then finds the people he's doing it with, don't share his values and commitments to human life. And I think having the Wasp network come in, the Wasp network is essentially introduced along with Gael Garcia Bernal's character. He's really the founding stone of it. And I think, although that voiceover is pretty didactic and it did make me giggle a bit, I didn't feel like it was skating over anything. I feel like I knew exactly what it was doing, what its aims were, how the people involved with it had got there. I don't know.
I just kind of, by that point, I'd think, well, obviously I agree with you about Renee and Olga and being the main kind of emotional hook of the movie, but it weirdly kind of meandered away from them, and I felt a lot of the subplots didn't really add much to that. I would have much preferred for it to work as a bit of drama if it had kind of stayed more down at the ground level with them. But instead of that,
Yeah.
nearly anything that's going to happen, we got kind of told about in dialogue first. It was weird. Like there's that bit where he's going to make the stop off in at the airfield, and it's like he's making this mysterious stop as a pilot. He doesn't know why they're going there. And it looked like it was going to
Yeah.
be a bit of foreshadowing and mystery, and he would find out that obviously what they're doing is picking up like a secret shipment of drugs, which they're using to fund the activities of the network. Which is like, well, that's quite good as a way of, showing the sort of moral decay that's taking place there. Except in the scene immediately before that, he'd been said, oh, well, this group, you're bound to get involved in these illegal drug smuggling runs. And so they just kind of weirdly sort of blew the mystery straight out of it. And it did that, I don't know, once or twice, like with the struggle with the Cuban bureaucracy, and the sort of political angle behind it of why Olga was getting, frustrated and why she was being sort of mistreated and they were giving her the runaround.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, they had scenes of that I thought were quite good as a bit of drama, but they came after they'd kind of already discussed that whole situation happening and she'd been told about it and she talked about it with people. And I didn't really get, in a way, why there was the kind of geopolitics of it was sort of talked about so much. It felt like I would have been more compelled if they just kind of followed Renee and Olga and their sort of personal experience of all the bits of it. But
Yeah, but then you wouldn't have got the more panoramic look at it, which is, I think, one of Asias's real strengths when coming to these narratives. I think he's genuinely a kind of a director who is tackling a globalized world in a way that makes me realise that very few other people are. And I think also if you'd narrowed it down to focus on Renee and Olga's story, you'd have lost Wagner Moura, Gail Garcia Bernal, and Ana de Armas, and I couldn't have gone for that at all.
Okay. You see, there were some interesting kind of subplots, like the bomber who's trying to disrupt the tourism industry, is going around.
Yeah.
But he felt quite kind of disconnected from all the other characters in it, and it seemed it seemed like a kind of, very much a sort of subplot that just kind of appeared out of nowhere and then went away again and didn't have many kind of consequences. I don't know. Well, no, it did have some consequences. That's unfair, but it didn't quite manage to be a kind of ensemble cast of the various people getting involved with the Wasp network. That guy who was the bomber basically turned up as like a student or something, didn't he, and was recruited.
Yeah.
And was surprisingly easily persuaded to become a bomber. It's essentially, they said, well, we need you to do this bombing. And it's like, he goes and plants a load of bombs in like hotel receptions in order to just spoil the tourism industry. And then he's kind of surprised when this turns out to have killed people.
Yes.
And I was sort of like, well, what did you think was going to happen if you put the bomb in a bin in the lobby of a hotel? But still,
But winding back, I think that thing you were mentioning about Renee being surprised by the drug situation, which he's already had explained to him, I think that's fine. I can't really imagine a way they could have played the cocaine reveal as a surprise without it feeling like the sort of scene that should have music going dum 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 over it. I think the fact that Renee is given this kind of theoretical understanding that he will be doing things that get him into shady areas, just as the bomber is told that, he will be doing things that may injure people, and then suddenly they're faced with the reality of it. It's actually kind of part of what the film is about, that you're dealing with the difference between an course of action that you might agree with based on a sort of abstract patriotic feeling and actually going out and carrying it out with your bare hands.
Well, I can't argue with that exactly. I mean, I can see that was part of the theme they were going for, and they got a good cast, but again, I didn't feel like the intensity of it built up anything like the amount it needed to, really. So, I don't know, it just didn't have anything like the effect on me it kind of could have had.
I think it would be fair to say that Assayas can be a bit of a cold fish. I think we have seen one Olivier Assayas film before, and we came out of it basically having this same argument, didn't we, when we went to see Personal Shopper?
Did we? Okay, sure.
That's listeners. That's probably an accurate reflection of Tim's feelings about Personal Shopper, right there.
I don't remember the argument, I'm afraid. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the limit of my verdict on Wasp Network, really. Is, I mean, you won't exactly get bored, but I felt like the whole thing could have been done better, really. Yeah.
I just want to say, before we move on, that it will be a very good year if there is a line in a film that makes me laugh as much as the one Ana de Armas has when she's interrogating her husband about his suspicious sudden wealth. And she says, "You don't get this kind of money from writing." It's funny because it's true.
Yeah, all right, yes.
Shall we move on to our streaming spotlight?
Yes, we can. I've been watching The Vast of Night by Andrew Patterson.
No, I'm very excited by this. Yeah, this looks interesting.
Yeah, which is a science fiction kind of piece. And is this his first feature film directed, I think? And he's already got an award for it.
Yeah, I believe
Patterson,
so.
Yeah. And it's... I mean, it's definitely an interesting bit of work. It's kind of one I didn't feel like I've seen before, even though you kind of go in with certain expectations. But it kind of sets itself up as being a big kind of Twilight Zone episode. And it actually, it actually starts with a fake intro for, Paradox Theatre Presents, as it's called, and sort of pans in on the old style TV. Although it doesn't really stylistically come out as like a kind of spoof piece of pulp, but it's very much set in the the kind of UFO incident culture of the United States in the like 1950s and 60s. And it follows a couple of kind of teenagers really in a small town in the US in the course of a single evening, who've pretty much just got their hands on a tape recorder for the first time. And so they're going around trying to pick up a mysterious kind of radio signal or something that's, dimly audible sometime in the town mysteriously, and has been noticed by various residents and kind of interpreted in that way. So it's definitely very closely drawn from the kind of UFO incident culture and all the kind of crazy theories that you get surrounding that, and the kind of weird kind of little incidents that takes place. And it's I'll tell you what, it has a particular merit is it's very, very wisely kept at like 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is the kind of thing where you would go in thinking, well, could they have been overambitious, and would it have been, would it have held 2 hours together? I'm not sure that it would, but it's this wonderfully kind of like ground level sort of story in almost real time, really, set in this small town where you got the two kids, Faye, played by Sierra McCormick, who was in Supernatural, the TV series, I think.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, and the other guy's Jake Horowitz as Everett. I don't think I've seen him in anything else really. But they pretty much just kind of race around the town, driving around, running around, interviewing different townsfolk and finding the ways in which these townspeople have kind of had strange contact with this mysterious signal, whatever it is, that might be, beaming down from the alien spaceship or something like that.
Yeah.
In a way, it's quite kind of uneventful as a story in 90 minutes, which is that mostly it kind of leans on some very good performances from the supporting cast who give like descriptions of what they think of as their encounter with aliens in some way, or something strange that happened to them. And they go and interview an old woman who then tells a very, very detailed kind of story about, incidents in her past where she came across something that was, seemed paranormal at the time, or she heard this mysterious signal before.
Yeah.
And he, talked to a guy from the army who relates, being given peculiar orders or going on a peculiar mission. And a lot of the kind of movie's drama does more or less just kind of emerge out of that. The fact that he just points the camera at these people and they're terrific actors and they do these kind of monologues, which takes quite a big part of the sort of middle of the movie when there's not a lot of actual kind of events happening. But it overall works very well. And like I say, 90 minutes is a very, very, very cleverly kept at that sort of length. The only thing is, I'm sure that, as people may have worked out already, it stands very slightly in the shadow of like Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah, I was getting a kind of early Spielberg kind of vibe from some of your description.
There's loads of kind of deep UFO culture. You could compare it to like the X-Files or something, but this has no institutional kind of authoritarian sort of aspect. The main characters aren't agents investigating or anything. They're just kids driving around with a tape recorder. And it's all just set among kind of civilians in this small town.
Yeah.
Picking up and kind of chatting to each other over the phone switchboard and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's got lots of nice kind of bits of retro 50s communications technology in it.
Nice.
It has a bit where, they're sort of scratching at the fourth wall a bit, really, where they're discussing how, he's reading an article from some magazine or something saying, in 50 years, everyone will have a radio telephone in their pocket that will do this and do that and the other and have video calls transmitted over long distances instantly. And it's like, well, that was reading pretty much, verbatim from real reports at the time, which basically were correct.
Yeah.
It's maybe a bit generous to sort of select those in hindsight and say, yeah, let's read out the one that was actually accurate. But
rather than the moon-based stuff.
Yeah. Andrew Patterson described this as being a kind of Trojan horse movie with a lot of stuff in it that you wouldn't expect to find in like a retro sci-fi movie.
Right.
Which is kind of quite good. It's more the kind of style of it, like I say, that it sort of leans on the actors quite heavily. So I don't know if they quite achieve it really being full of surprises. But it is like an unusual style for this kind of story. And I guess mainly because we're used to these kind of movies being like a lazy found footage thing, and it definitely isn't that. It's
yeah.
I guess maybe everyone's got sick of found footage by now.
I think so. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and it only took like 20 years, right? But yeah. So this is done in a way quite a kind of don't know if you call it kind of artificial style, but it has things like long sort of swooping shots where the camera, suddenly follows a car and it follows it right the way across the town in one tracking shot and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or follows someone on foot the same sort of distance. And it pretty much just, follows these two characters, Faye and Everett, around the town, gradually getting nearer and nearer and discovering slightly more about this strange, signal from space or whatever it is. And I don't kind of want to spoil exactly what happens, but ultimately they do kind of get a glimpse of, the real sort of alien presence like that. You'll have to watch it yourself. Like I said, it's going to remind you of Close Encounters of the Third Kind if you're of the right age to have actually seen that. It's the kind of thing you may not be able to avoid noticing, but I don't know. I suspect, have we got younger listeners, Graham, who will be totally unaware of Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
Well, I think certain technological advancements have taken place that allow you to watch old films.
Yes, so I've heard. But it's the other thing is also that on the other hand, Close Encounters is a kind of epic quality where it goes around the world's different landscapes, and you see very kind of spectacular stuff, and there's huge military operations going on. Whereas you hear a bit of that stuff described in Vast of Night, but you don't really see any of it. It pretty much just follows these two kids with a tape recorder in a car.
Yeah, which is nice sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, it's I'd definitely say, it's a very strong bit of work. If that sounds like it appeals to you, it's quite sort of it's quite limited in its scope, but in a good way. It's sort of like he realizes that you've got this idea of one sort of paranormal sighting, something like a glimpse of an alien spaceship or a signal from space or something like that. And that's kind of enough to carry the movie. It follows the character's interest in that and everyone's sort of reactions to it, and you get kind of different perspectives on it that way.
Yeah.
Rather than needing constant kind of plot advancements. It's Andrew Patterson being the director, and I of the opinion based on that he's definitely one to watch, maybe in a mold of being sort of like an American Ben Wheatley.
Nice.
So you end up with a kind of sort of mystery theatre kind of anthology aspect to his whole filmography really. Well, I don't know, that's with a bit of luck maybe something like that. We hope he makes something else that's as kind of quirky and strange and also kind of a bit sinister at the same time.
Yeah.
Although I'll tell you what, his next film, virtually nothing is known about, but it is described as, and I quote, a revenge thriller set in the honeybee industry.
Sold. Fine. Has he considered...
Yeah, that's what I thought, straight away sold.
Has he considered calling...
Revenge thriller, Has he considered calling it what?
Has he considered calling it B Network?
Yeah, I don't know. It's really just, sticking twisting the knife a bit with the wasps. Yet and again, the honeybees come out on top. No one will cast a wasp.
I'm Dylan Horrocks, a cartoonist from New Zealand, and you're listening to The Geek Show.
Okay, Graham, the other question, which I'm sure the listeners are going to be fascinated at the answer to, is what are you writing at the moment? I understand you got something that might be of interest to us.
I certainly have. I've been writing a review for this podcast, which, when posted on iTunes or anywhere else you get your podcasts, does help with the analytics, helps us become more visible, and allows us to grow as a podcast. Or if you want to do something that, say, is a bit more direct, you can donate some money on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. We have a Facebook, a Twitter, and a new Instagram account. Search for TGS_The Geek Show.
Dating all the way back to 2010 on the Badlands of community radio, The Geek Show has been a podcast of many faces, the Bowie of podcasts. For the longest time we discussed all manner of geeky issues, reviewed discs from far and wide, and had some D&D style distractions involving elves and the Communist Manifesto, all of which led us to now. The Geek Show is now an anarchic news and discussion show which looks at all things pop culture, as well as dipping our toe into the wild waters of science, technology, and whatever Elon Musk is up to this week. For all this and much, much more, check out The Geek Show by subscribing to us wherever you get your podcasts from, including Acast, Audioboom or Spotify, or head over onto thegeekshow.co.uk where the geek shall inherit the earth.
So, if you go over to thegeekshow.co.uk, you can find some of our written reviews of films that we're not doing on the podcast. Like Mark Cunliffe, for example, has just completed a review of one of the central tenets of my religion of Bowietology. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence.
Bowietology?
Don't disrespect my faith.
Okay, fine.
At some point coming soon, I will also have a review up there of Criterion's new collection of Martin Scorsese's early short films. But for now, I was sent a extremely generous package. We're not talking about Bowie again. Hello, Labyrinth. An extremely generous package of new classic films from Eureka Masters of Cinema recently, and the one I got to review was Criss by Robert Siodmak. This is a 1949 film noir. Siodmak is an interesting guy. He directed People on Sunday, which is the last of that cycle of really great German silent movies. And People on Sunday is one of those films where you look down the list of people involved with it now, and every single person went on to be famous. It's incredible. You had Billy Wilder writing the script, you had Fred Zinnemann working on it. It's just, it's a real breeding ground for talent. And Siodmak's noir work is important because I think sometimes that link between German expressionism and film noir can sound a bit overstated. It's like, well, you might think, did the people making film noirs really want to extend the legacy of a German art house film movement, or did they just want to make some solid crime films? But with Siodmak, there is actually a concrete connection. He was a German expressionist who went to America and made film noir. It's a pretty sturdy story. It's adapted from a novel of the same title by Don Tracy. It was also remade as The Underneath in 1995, which I know Steven Soderbergh cites as his most disappointing film. I haven't seen that, possibly because of these sterling reviews, but I can't imagine it's as good as Criss, and I do like Soderbergh. It's the story of a guy called Steve Thompson, who's played by a very young Burt Lancaster, who comes back to Los Angeles to find his ex-wife has married a local mobster with the extraordinary name of Slim Dundee.
Okay.
Yeah. No relation, as far as I can tell, to Crocodile.
Yeah.
Because this is a film noir and everyone makes the worst possible decisions at every conceivable time, he rekindles his affair with his ex-wife, Anna, and they hatch a plan to double-cross Dundee on an armoured car robbery he's planning. And, it'll surprise no one to know that this goes a bit badly.
Yeah.
But the question with film noir is always not, is it going to go badly? Because it always does, or at least it should do, but how badly and how interestingly. And to get the badly question out of the way first, I won't spoil the ending, but it might just be one of the bleakest images that's ever ended a film noir film. It's just absolutely hopeless stuff, and it really does show that well-meaning directive that the Hays Code brought in, that you can't show anyone profiting from crime, you can't show the criminals winning even if they're likeable, actually, failed to make American crime cinema wholesome and lovely at all. It made it impressively morbid and horrible for quite a long time. So that's part of it, but the road to getting there is kind of interesting. I mean, we see Steve working on as an armoured car driver early on, and when a film noir starts with its hero driving an armoured car with bags of cash in the back, you sort of know there's only one way this story can go, right?
Yeah, okay. Does it Does it go that way, or does it go somewhere else?
Well, it does go that way, but it's interesting because it takes its time getting there. And what I kept thinking is that this feels like a prototype for that kind of relaxed shaggy dog story kind of noir that started emerging in the 70s with things like Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye or things like that. Obviously, tonally it's very different because, as I said, it's bleak as hell. That sort of Long Goodbye strain of noir has now mutated into kind of comic things like The Big Lebowski and Inherent Vice, but Criss is definitely not a comedy. But there is, for a good half hour at the start, still this emphasis on just hanging out with the characters, getting to know their world, getting to know their relationships, seeing the nightclubs and dance halls they go to. One of which, by the way, features an uncredited appearance by an energetic young jitterbugger called Tony Curtis in his first ever film.
Oh, right.
He's only there for a second, but as soon as he crosses the frame, you can't mistake him for anyone else. It's quite funny. So there's a lot going for it, and because this is an A-picture noir, Siodmak was coming off the back of The Killers, which also starred Burt Lancaster and had been a great success. There's a bit more money invested into it. It's not stuck on sound stages like a lot of the B-movie noirs were. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I kind of like that weird, stagey, dreamlike, artificial quality you get in really cheap film noir. I think sometimes the cheaper film noirs are more interesting than the big budget stuff, but in a film like this, where you have to believe in the characters being part of a real world with a real family and society around them, it does help immeasurably that wherever possible, Siodmak can actually get out onto the streets, which was something that was, very difficult to do with the filming equipment at the time. So that's very welcome. It is the sort of film that is made for people like Tom Anderson, who did that film Los Angeles Plays Itself. It's made for people like him to note down all of the LA neighbourhoods it features and which other films have used those locations. It has a good rooted sense of place. Lancaster is, as ever, fantastic in the lead role. Anna is played by Yvonne De Carlo, who had a really strange career. Early on in her career, she tended to be cast as exotic temptresses, which is, often the lot of golden age Hollywood actresses when they came from places like, the Czech Republic or Hungary, or in De Carlo's case, Canada?
Right, okay. She had that exotic foreign allure.
Yeah, the exotic foreign allure of Vancouver.
I don't know, maybe we shouldn't be snitty. Well, okay. No, carry on.
But she shook that stereotyping off. She started pushing for more heavyweight roles, and this was one of the first ones she got. She went on to work with Cecil B. DeMille on The Ten Commandments and quite a lot of his other massive blockbusters. And she makes a very good go of a kind of variant of the film noir femme fatale, who is actually quite level-headed and pragmatic and isn't really that bad. I mean, there's no question that Slim Dundee is the villain in here, and he is part of a very strange criminal underworld that it seems to be ruled over by this old guy who looks a bit like Colonel Sanders and is terribly well-spoken and plays chess against himself. It's not a gang boss like any other I've ever seen in a movie, but it's very memorable. I think it's got a lot to offer. I mean, this is released in the same year as The Third Man and Akira Kurosawa's Stray Dog, which you could say from those films is the point at which the outside world is kind of starting to discover film noir and starting to imitate it a bit. And certainly The Third Man and Stray Dog are excellent films. But Criss Cross shows there was still plenty of juice left in the American Hollywood film noir. It still had a long way to go before it burned itself out. It's a really fascinating, narratively unexpected film, which is surprising considering, as I've said, the story is about a couple of saps who try and double-cross a violent gangster. But no prizes will be delivered for working out how this one unfolds.
But am I right in thinking that Criss Cross, I have the idea in my head that it didn't really go down as an absolute classic, at least not at first. It's a bit of a kind of dark horse, really.
Yeah. I think for a while it didn't do that badly at the box office, but it got forgotten quite quickly. And for a while it was one of those films that real film noir archaeologists, the real diehards, used to say, well, if you want a great noir that no one ever talks about, you should watch Criss Cross. And now I've seen it, and I do think it lives up to its hype. I think it's a really strong, undervalued film, and I do hope this Masters of Cinema Blu-ray leads to a few more people being led in on its cult.
Well, that sounds great. I'm going to look it up based on that, because I've never seen it.
Scored by Miklos Rosa, too, which always goes down well. But yes, so that's Criss Cross. And now I've been doing a bit of extracurricular work this week. I have recorded a review with Mick yesterday of Dream Demon, which is out now on Arrow Videos this week.
Absolutely, yes. So we're on Zoom Shake the Room, as nobody calls it.
Absolutely.
And quite right too. And we are reviewing a new title from Arrow, I believe.
Indeed. I mean, you say new.
Well, a newly reissued title from Arrow.
Yes, Dream Demon.
Woo.
I mean, they could have saved some printing costs by calling it Dreamin'.
Yes.
But yes, Dream Demon is what I put myself through for this podcast.
Okay.
1988, it originally surfaced.
Mm-hmm.
Directed by Harley Coakless and stars Gemma Redgrave in her debut role.
Really? Your first ever?
Yes.
Oh.
And according to the interview with Mr. Coakless, this release comes after they found it on a cutting room floor and have now restored and remastered it.
Okay.
It also stars, and I'm going to use this phrase loosely, Twin Peaks alum Kathleen Willhoite.
Now, I'm a Twin Peaks obsessive, but that name
I know you are. I
Isn't.
know you are. Maybe it'll mean more to you when
Oh,
I tell you that in Twin Peaks,
yeah.
I've got to scroll a long way down to find it. Twin Peaks. She played the character Gwen Morton in the episode Drive with a Dead Girl.
No.
So in this instance, then, Twin Peaks alum means just someone who was in it.
Basically, yes.
Right, okay. Fine. I mean, looking back, she's mainly a singer, songwriter, and actress, but she plays the American who has links to the house. I should maybe synopsize.
Perhaps we should.
Yes. So the story revolves. Story. I can't believe I called it a story. The story revolves around Diana Markham, played by Gemma Redgrave, who is about to marry an Air Force officer, played by Mark Greenstreet.
Mhm.
And she's clearly got some anxiety about this, and rightly so, because Mark Greenstreet plays an absolute knob.
Right.
He's basically he's an Air Force officer. They mention a few times that he's a Falklands hero, and that he's clearly quite high up in the Air Force, but he's obviously away quite a lot as well. But it turns out that he's highly in debt and a bit of a philanderer.
And he can't sweat following a traumatic experience he had out there. No, wait, that's the other guy, isn't it?
Yeah. This. It's not mentioned, but now you come to point it out, we should call this Falkland syndrome.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, Mark Greenstreet doesn't deviate much from being some kind of, I don't know, Jerry Anderson character in this. But anyway, she's it's the society wedding in the place where they live. She's a teacher at what appears to be a primary school. Nothing special, but there are. She's called Diana, and she's a teacher at a primary school. And it's the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying.
Harley, where do you get your crazy ideas from?
Exactly. So, anyway, she starts having these sort of anxiety dreams about the wedding, some of which are about her friend, who is a doctor, played by Susan Fleetwood, tries to explain it as anxiety about losing her virginity on her wedding night. She's not been there before, and so that's why the dreams seem a little bit rapey.
Okay,
that's her explanation for it. Anyway, she's heading off towards school one day, and as she approaches the gate, she gets approached by the local rag reporter, Paul, played by Jimmy the Nail.
No way.
That's right. Yeah, it's Avida Sane horror.
Ain't no doubt it's Jimmy Nail.
Strolling down the street in his crocodile shoes.
Oh man, this is digging into a very specific kind of... To any of our younger listeners, don't bother looking it up. Who cares?
And he's aided and abetted by Tim Spall, who plays the quite gross local rag photographer, Peck.
Good casting. I like it.
So they interview, and although they mention the name of the paper, and it is just a local sort of, generic name, the Chronicle and Post or something like that. I think it means the Sun. So Nail's character claims to be an investigative reporter, and he's, just asking general questions about the Falklands hero aspect and the big society wedding, and then Paul starts leering and asking lascivious questions as a sort of follow-up to whatever Paul's asking. Anyway, obviously she loses her rag and storms off into the school. We then see them re-engage with her outside her house, and at the point where she's threatening to call the police, they get attacked by a punky-looking American, which is the aforementioned Twin Peaks Alan, playing a character called Jenny Hoffman, who herself feels she has links to the house that Gemma and Oliver are going to move into, and she just happens to have turned up at this juncture, and she goes in and has a cup of tea with the person that she's just ostensibly rescued from being nestled between page 3 and the Did You Know section of the paper. So Jenny's got a bit of history. She can't remember her family. But she's done a bit of. She's been adopted. She lives in California, and she's traced the last known address of her family, who she knows both her parents died, and they both died at that address. The house has been a wedding present from Diana's dad to her and Oliver. And Jenny and Diana strike up are remarkably close in such a little amount of time. Over the course of like 3 days, they go from being complete strangers to, I'll move in and look after you.
Okay. Yeah.
Crazy. And Gemma keeps having these nightmares, these disturbing dreams, and they all link to the house. And at various times, people in the real world go missing and turn up in her dreams. Such as the photographer, who's a nasty, nasty piece of work, before he dies and turns into what you can see behind me. The reporter ends up in there. And then eventually, it seems that whatever happens to real life people while Diana is dreaming affects them in the real world until they get sucked into the nightmare, and you have to wake Diana up to stop that happening.
I see.
Which is a bit difficult when it then gets to the stage where the dreams are nested.
Inception style-y.
I mean, this is way, way, way before Inception. But, you know, the seeds are there, if you like. And ultimately, it turns out that Jenny suffered a childhood trauma, which her mother was already dead. Her dad was some kind of crazed artist. And there's an accident in which he burns to death and she makes it out alive. But obviously she's blocked this mentally. And ultimately, you're left wondering how the hell they're going to get out of this. Because I mean, it ends with Diana sort of chucking Oliver and saying, no way, Jose.
The way you said that, I genuinely thought you were just going to say, it ends. That's it. It just ends.
It's funny you should say that. So she dispenses with the wedding.
Right.
Bizarrely, rather than giving the ring back to Oliver, she deposits it in the collection box at the local church that they were going to get wedding.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good diss.
I mean, it's clearly a small sort of country village or town, and so the vicar probably, you know, is also the local pawnbroker.
Yes.
But and chip shop owner. There's no real resolution about the house. Now, the problem with this film is it's 1988. It's low budget. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I don't know what the actual budget was, but I think they got change out of a tenner. For a VHS release from the 80s that is supposed to be a psychological horror movie, it's quite reasonably done. The effects are okay. They're not spectacular, but they're not rubbish.
Yeah.
The really big action sequences, however, do rely on a lot of shafted sunlight, a lot of smoke effects, and if you took them all together, you could have an 8-minute long video for a Jim Steinman song of the same era.
Excellent.
In fact, I'm tempted at some point to actually do that, cut them together and play them alongside I Would Do Anything for Love. But I mean, it was the 80s. That was the effects that people did. The big problem, the performances are okay. I mean,
you've got the cast for it.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Greenstreet is a little bit two-dimensional, but then he's a cipher character anyway, really.
Yeah.
The Brideshead alum Nicholas Grace, who plays Jenny's father in the flashbacks, is quite chilling without appearing to be trying to be chilling.
Yeah.
As the sort of, is there such a thing as gently abusive? I mean,
Probably not.
He's clearly an abusive father, but in the film we don't see any sort of violence.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
psychological.
It's a very shouty abusive.
Yeah.
Thing. But he's excellent in the small section that he's in. Everybody else turns in decent performances. The girl they've got as the young Jenny is frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, well, what she reminds me of is if they got the adult Sally Phillips and filmed her as though she was an 8-year-old.
I think there is a sketch in Chris Morris's Blue Jam where this happens, but carry on.
And it's made all the more freaky because she's forced by her father to model in this set of angel wings for a statue that he's making. And it's a freaky look.
Yeah.
The one thing that they are, it's competently directed. There's nothing particularly wrong-footed. The problem is all with, I mean, even in a psychological thriller about dreams, there needs to be some kind of internal logic.
Yeah.
And in this, there's heavy overtones of an Alice in Wonderland type vibe. There's a scene where Gemma realizes that she can cross into the dream world through a mirror.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes that doesn't work. And prior to that, we'd only ever seen her enter the dream world through dreams.
Yeah.
Hence it being a dream world.
Yeah.
There's this, an inconsistency between whether it's just a dark and disturbing version of the house she lives in, or a mirror version of the house she lives in, and sometimes it transfers her to her flat that she used to live in.
Yeah.
So it lacks a certain sort of consistency. And there's no bloody demon.
What? This was going way back to when we reviewed the Neon Demon. This was Ryan's exact problem with the Neon Demon. There is not a neon demon in it.
Is there some neon?
Don't get me wrong. The neon is plentiful.
And it's very, I wonder if they were written by the same person. There are dreams.
Yeah.
But they're not caused by a demon.
Boo.
Unless you're talking about the psychological demons that people wrestle with every day. But then that's to be deeper than this film really deserves. It's not a terrible film. It's watchable. It's not one where you get to sort of 40 minutes in and go, why am I doing this to myself? I suspect Gemma Redgrave probably leaves it off her official resume.
Yeah, I think she's done a bit since, hasn't she?
Yeah. But, you know, as a first outing as a unit commander-in-chief, it's, you know, it's a pretty good go. It'll have built up a metal. It's interesting. It's severely flawed. Does it deserve a place in a pantheon of British horror movies? No. Is it an interesting curio? Yes. Is it one for the Gemma Redgrave completist? Probably. Are there any?
Who knows?
But yeah, so that's Dream Demon from 1988.
Right, so question of the week this week could only be one thing. It's what's your favourite Ian Holm performance?
Because he seems to be very, very well liked, I think. I mean, rightly so. He's I don't know if it's even that he occupies a kind of it's that guy sort of role. How many people are really aware of him? You couldn't exactly call him a big star necessarily, but he has had a lot of very, very memorable roles over the years. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's great that, like you say, he was usually a character actor rather than a lead, but when he died, you could see how much he meant to viewers. Like, the amount of replies we got in, all saying completely different things, is just fantastic. On Instagram, Stephen Sidhu111 says Chef Skinner in Ratatouille.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about it too, but yeah, he's great in that. Yeah. On our Facebook page, Matt Colver says he was very good as Ash in Alien and also in The Fifth Element, but I think Bilbo has to be my favourite, just for that bit where he makes a grab for the ring.
I was going to mention that as a fantastic bit of a... God, that's a hell of a jump scare in the circumstance, considering. Yeah.
It's one of those things, isn't it, that it's almost ridiculous, and maybe with another actor it would be, but yeah, it really works with him.
It's also one of those things where it's kind of like it happens so quickly and is over so quickly that I'm left with no idea whether that was like done with like practical effects and makeup. Was it just his appearance? Yeah. Was it done with CGI? I've no clue whatsoever, really.
Yeah, it's great. Our producer Rob has a list of 4. Alien, as mentioned before. Time Bandits, where of course he plays Napoleon.
Yes.
Greystoke and The Borrowers, and I'm so glad someone mentioned that last one.
I mean, it shows...
Do you remember the...
I remember The Borrowers. My answer was going to be Brazil.
Ah, well, yes.
Someone else must have given that as their answer.
Yeah, Rob Simpson says love him in Brazil and Fifth Element. Chris Common Swings says Big Night. Mikey Toes says, and I do love this wording, Alien for his chilling android crush on the xenomorph above the crew.
Yeah, very good way of putting it, yeah.
Yes, I love that.
And like I say, he shows off some real range in these roles because he's also very, very kind of like silly sort of character roles in kind of comedies, and even kind of Bilbo played for laughs quite a bit as well. And then in Alien, he just is a pretty well straight up cold psychopath, really.
Yeah, he's terrifying.
Yeah, he tries to sort of strangle and smother someone, doesn't he? Is his main.
Yeah. He has this sort of horrible method of, doesn't he, like try and force a newspaper down someone's throat or something?
God, yeah. I mean, it's the kind of thing where you, in a way, it would have been pretty scary and would still have worked if he hadn't turned out to be a robot. But on the other hand, the fact that he does turn out to be a robot almost doesn't add any new horrifying information in a way. It's kind of,
Ian Payne points out that before he was Bilbo, he played Frodo in a radio adaptation of Lord of the Rings.
Yes, so I was told. I've never actually heard that as well, but it's very well loved by a lot of people, I think.
He then notes, as this is cinema eclectica, then The Emperor's New Clothes is a sweet little film with Holm playing 2 roles. And finally, we've got some Twitter answers from Aidan. He says, I just want to give a shout out to Holmes' excellent performance in Sidney Lumet's Night Falls on Manhattan, a very underrated crime drama with Holmes as a police detective caught up in a corruption scandal. He's very sympathetic and masters the New York accent to a T. Also, I forgot he voiced Chef Skinner in Ratatouille. There's a fun performance. So yeah, tons of stuff. Have you got any that you feel are left unspoken, unaccounted for?
Oh, I don't think I do particularly. I mean, again, mine too would have been the obvious picks, which would have been Ash in Alien and the character whose name in Brazil temporarily escapes him, Mr. Kurtzman.
Kurtzman, yes.
Who has a very, very absurd voice and is just kind of extremely worried about everything happening in that society, really. Quite convincingly
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
No, I absolutely co-sign all of those, and the Borrowers too, which I was obsessed with as a child. Looking down his filmography, there's a few things that I really must make the time to see. But one thing that has stuck with me, one more obscure choice, he did the voiceover. And it is one of those things like, say, Samuel L. Jackson in I Am Not Your Negro. It is one of those things where it is definitely a voiceover performance. There is a lot more here than just some bored actor reading a script out in a sound booth. For a film called Wisconsin Death Trip.
Okay, which sounds dimly familiar to me.
It was a film that James Marsh made before he started doing all these like biopics, like Theory of Everything and things like that. But it's a very strange BBC Arena film that is based on a book collection of crime reports from a small town in Wisconsin in the 1890s. And in this absolutely picturesque kind of little house on the prairie place, there's suddenly this horrifying eruption of, brutal violence and drug addiction and infanticide and live burials and absolutely mad stuff. And Ian Holm delivers it with, I think, just enough macabre flair to make it bearable, but not so much that it just becomes a kind of sick joke. There is still a pathos to it. I think it's a beautifully judged performance, and if anyone is curious about how much a voiceover can dictate the tone and character of a documentary, that is a masterclass in it.
Is it fair to point out some real junkies been in as well? Without meaning any insult to him. Ian Holm did in fact play Jack the Ripper in the appalling film adaptation of From Hell.
Now, hang on. I think his performance as William Gull is pretty damn good.
Yeah, I was going to say, this was the point I was going to make, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, to be honest, maybe other Alan Moore adaptations have lowered the bar so far, but I don't think From Hell is that bad. I mean, the book is unadaptable, so I can cut it a bit of slack that way.
All right, I suppose I'll give you that one. Probably, if the book didn't exist and we just watched it as a movie, we'd kind of think, yeah, that was all right. That had some quite interesting stuff in it. But
yeah.
And like you say, his performance is pretty good. You can't fault them there, really. Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, it's a pretty varied back catalogue, you are right to say. Next week on Cinema Eclectica, we're having a director's lottery, which is the part in the show where I remember we're doing a director's lottery. Let me just bring that up like I should have done about half an hour ago. While I'm getting this up, Tim, can you produce a random number generator for me?
I can. What range of numbers?
I am just going through now. Fix it at 280.
Random number between 280. Your number is 58.
58, which takes us to Victor Sjöström. Finally, some Swedish silent cinema in his house.
What did Victor Sjöström direct?
Well, I'm not an expert, which is probably why I've almost certainly mispronounced his name, but he was a mentor of Ingmar Bergman, and his biggest hit is probably The Phantom Carriage.
Wow, okay.
It's definitely going back some, I'll give it that. It's pretty old school. A bit of 1920s retro.
Yeah.
But yes, until next week, when we will be doing a film, we will decide which over the week, a film by Victor Sjöström. That's been your lot from Cinema Eclectica. I've been Graham.
And I've been Tim.
See you next week.